Okay. Turn on? Oh, you turn on. Thank you. Hello. That was a fancy thing. Oh, there we go. Hi, I'm Jason Stern. I'm the CEO for Simfoni Spend Intelligence. If you I've had a 20-year history in procurement technology, and what I've seen over the last, maybe I say 2 years, has been a real shift in the thinking in the procurement departments. And it's amazing, in this conference I've heard so much talking in the last session about aligning with ESG goals and how that's like permeated into the procurement department. So this is, almost can be redundant, because what they were saying on stage just prior to us was exactly similar to what I'm talking about here. First, let me tell you a little story. So this is not the first time I've been a CEO. My first job as a CEO was actually a very small public company, and it was a bit of a turnaround, and I got the opportunity, and my big initiative was with this very large company known for their Six Sigma, but I don't want to name names. Okay? And after 6-9 months of proving the solution will work for them and going through all the diligence on that, they said, great, you're selected, and it was going to be a transformational deal for my company and actually for their company. So that I don't think it would have been working with a company of our size if it wasn't for the technology. Okay, so I believe the technology can do something for them. So they then started their due diligence, and they checked our financials, they checked our IT security, and this is mind you, over 10 years ago. So we didn't even have InfoSec then. They went through our processes. There was no SOC 2 then. And they went through, and that took, I think it was like 5 or 6 months. It was during that time frame, I had been investing in building up more of the solution and people, to support this giant company that was about to, transform my little company. And it was great. So we got through all of that, and now we're ready to go through signing a contract. And they said, let me introduce you to the procurement department. And I got a call, and a gentleman said, we talked about indemnity, we talked about insurance, and then he says, now I'd like to talk to you about the price. And he said to me, the budget for this project is not $1 million, it's $100,000. He had a goal, he had an objective, to cost reduction, cost avoidance. That was what he was metric on. Didn't matter to him about all the other aspects. We were a small business, we had done all this due diligence, it was transformational for their business, for the line of business that we were working with. So he had his goal. And there was nothing wrong with that, because that's what he was intended to do. That was his goal. But things have changed now. So now the goals need to change, because we need to get alignment with what matters to investors, what matters to CEOs. Okay, so take investors. So investors care about ESG. Why? It's proven that companies have a higher valuation if they have clear metrics and programs around ESG. And so you need to be able to present those metrics. And by the way, there's no standard right now for what an ESG metric is. There's a bunch of formulas I've seen out there, but there's no industry standard for what that is, right? But investors, boards, they care. Okay, CEOs, they care, right? They care, obviously, valuation, but they also care because all the stakeholders, the employees, the customers, the partners, whoever they're working with cares. And of course, it's their brand, so the CEOs do care, right? In the last Deloitte CPO survey in 2001, listing the priorities for CPOs, if you notice here, it doesn't make the top 5. So Warren Buffett's famous for saying, if you make a list to start your year, and you pick the top 25 things you're going to accomplish that year, if you spend any time on number 6 or below, you've wasted your time. You're not going to be successful until you've completed those first 5. It's not in the first 5. Interesting enough, it's in survey, and it says, are you meeting your objectives? Well, of course, if it's a priority, you meet your objectives. We're all, we all can do what we set a priority out to do, right? If it's not a priority, you're not going to meet the objectives, right? So that's clear by the numbers, So this is in the same survey. So the question is, how do we transform ourselves from 17% to 88%? And so in another Deloitte survey to CEOs, and this is 2022, very recent, when it said, who is the most important person that works for you in your company? Do you notice who's missing? So we've talked, like, obviously CEOs care. I mean, everybody said that. The last session said that. We all agree CEOs care, investors care. But we have goals, but yet we're not meeting those goals, so we're not aligned with what the company really cares about at this point. So, okay, so I'm going to get more into practically how you can achieve that, go from 17 to 88. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Keith Woody. He's one of our customers. He's taken our spend analytics product and been able to layer a diversity program and automate the whole process. So now his people are working on how to improve their diversity programs, not how to report on them. So Keith?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So I joined Fulton Bank about a year ago. They did not have a strategic sourcing function. They did have a vendor risk management function that was stood up. So the opportunity coming in, and as we've heard over the last few days, I've been a part of a lot of transformations at large companies. I've been a lot of small companies, but getting my handle on spend was an absolute priority. For us, and what I came into, it was basically an Excel spreadsheet, and it was not even that great of an Excel spreadsheet. So getting the spend analytics and partnering with someone like Simfoni was essential for us to be able to have the dialogue. A lot of banks today, historically, a lot of regulatory bodies, the questionnaires have been more voluntary in nature, particularly around reporting supplier diversity and your spend with supplier diversity. That's starting to change. So it was also very imperative. So when I took that opportunity and discussion over to the team, they were helping me put that layer on there, and then I had a complete view of what our spend was from a diverse perspective. And I could actually take that back to our CEO and his team to have them understand, hey, this is where we're starting from. Which is about 1% today.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we go from 17 to 88, right? That's the goal. So it comes down to three areas, so aligning the people, having the right objectives and the right, we talk about OKRs and KPIs and those types of things. So having the right people, being able to measure this appropriately, and not spending all I've talked to so many companies that the people that are responsible for improvement spend all their time in the reporting and not in the process of improving. So there, so you might make the measurements got to be easy, got to make sense, and then you can put together action plans. And I'll give you some examples of what our customers have been able to do with some action plans. So briefly. Sometimes I used to get confused about there's CSR and there's ESG. And your CSR is their values. All companies have corporate values. Our company has, because we call it great impact, and it stands for a lot of things. Promoter will tell you more about it. But one of them is diversity, actually. So you have your values. You say, my company has values working with diverse suppliers. The ESG, though, is the measurement part. And that's why investors care, because everybody can have the values, but how are you actually performing to your values? So that's where the ESG comes in, and that's the actual measurement part. You say, I want to drive our program from 1% to 10%. That's a measurement that you can do. Okay, so it's really important to be able to measure that. So now back to the people. So Gartner's survey says 50% of procurement departments are made up of sourcing professionals, and what are sourcing professionals doing? They're driving cost savings, right? Cost avoidance and maybe reducing risk, it's part of that. But what are they measured on? And less than 20%, as you've heard, is category managers, diversity. I've even started running into now. There's dedicated ESG folks embedded in procurement. We all have a lot of diversity people embedded in procurement. But there's a new thing where there's actually an embedded person that's responsible for that. And it's not in the sustainability part of the company, because they're more looking at what's our carbon footprint. We're talking about your supply chain, not measures on what you're doing. How many people here are familiar with what's called the Rooney Rule in the NFL? Anybody? Okay. So 20 years ago, the NFL said, we have a problem. There's 30 teams and there's only 4 minority coaches. And one of the patriarchs of the NFL said, let's put a policy that for every head coaching position you have to interview 1 minority candidate before making a decision. we do that now, right? We say for every sourcing event, we want to include a diverse supplier in that process, right? That's like we put that policy in place. So it's 20 years later, and until the most recent hire, there's still 30 teams, and there's still only 4 minority coaches. Okay? In fact, there's even a lawsuit by minority coaches saying, you've made me go through a process that wasn't fair. So there's been, just by having the policy in place, there's really no results. Okay, so what you got to be focusing on is on the actual results, on getting to. So you can put all the policies in place, but you got to look at the numbers. So what we do is we actually believe that what you're spending money on, what your company's spending money on, is actually what's really important, and that's how you will affect change. So, not to get a little technical here or whatever, but it starts off with the granularity of the data. And you have to know not who you're buying something from, but what you're buying. What products, services, what commodities, whatever you're buying, you have to know it at that level. So you have to have a very granular taxonomy, and you have to classify your spend down to that granularity. And to be able to do that, it really requires, modern technology that can do that. Like I think Michael talked about ML at the beginning. It's very important. It's because if you do this manually with rules, like we all talk about rules, and do this, it is always going to be wrong. Always going to have errors. It's never going to get to the quality that you need. And if you don't trust the data, it's worthless. So you got to get to that granularity of the data and knowing what you're buying and what you're spending on those things. Because then things become action. You can make decisions. I'll give you a good example. I drive an electronic vehicle. Okay, I'm the manufacturer makes gas vehicles. So just because if I bought a gas vehicle, is that lowering the carbon footprint? Because I'm buying from a manufacturer that has an electric vehicle. So knowing what you're buying is actually what is important. Okay. So then you like Fulton here, you layer the data on top of it. So it's great to report how much of our diverse suppliers are minorities and how much are women. That's important. So there's classifications in there. But there's nothing to do to improve that. So when you layer that on top of your procurement taxonomies and what you're spending on, now things become actionable. Okay. So for example, I might have spent a lot of effort and time onboarding a diverse supplier. Right. Now only one business unit of my 10 are actually buying from that supplier, when they could support 8 of the 10. And I can look at that in the data, and now I can simply call up those other business units and ask them, why are they buying from these other suppliers when you have a perfectly acceptable supplier that's approved that you can purchase from, and that's affecting change. That's how you go from 1 to 10. That makes the difference, right? We've all spent time onboarding diverse suppliers, and they get orphaned. They bought a couple times, whoever bought from them moved on, and now there's no more spend on them. You should be alerted about that. It shouldn't just come up in a report 3 months later. So these are the types of things you can do that are actionable. But again, you have to know what you're buying to make these things work. So we recently introduced an impact assessment module, and that, not to get too salesy, that gives us a quantifiable metrics of not just your company's consumption, but also your supply chain. Because we actually part of that is it actually goes out and surveys the supply chain and maintains the data from them. So we actually understand how your supply chain is performing. But then because we're laying it on top of your dollars, you now have the ability to impact change. So not to kick the NFL again, but you all remember the story of the Washington football team? It wasn't 20 years that owner would not change his name. And as soon as FedEx and Nike and Amazon said, we're not going to do business with you anymore unless you do something, 1 week later, they changed their name. So the dollars matter. So this is, knowing what you're spending on and then applying the ESG. I'm also amazing. I've been thinking, as a consumer, we look at the labels, right? We buy products and we look at things like, how much sugar's in there, how many carbohydrates, the calories, whatever else. You know what I don't see on that label? I don't see what is the carbon requirement to produce this product. Because I think a lot of us might change our buying decision if we knew that. And so, corporations can do that today. So that's kind of, and we can show them how to do it. Let me give you a good use case here. We have a customer is a large appliance manufacturer, and to install their product is very technical. Like consumers don't buy and install these things. So it's very technical, right? And so you have to be licensed. You have to be, you have to know electrician or whatever. I don't know. So they were pitched by a company to do a digital manual instead of the paper-based, and they looked at it initially as an additional cost. Why would it's more money? It's an additional cost. But then looking at the data, they determined, well, wait a second, how much are we spending on the manual version, and and the paper-based, and then because they had an eye for ESG, they're like, well, what is the impact? So they use our software, and they were able to figure out there was a hard dollar savings to switching. There was other savings because all of a sudden the quality of the installations went up because they actually had videos to do that. I mean, I have teenagers and they will never read a manual. They go right to YouTube to figure out how to do anything, right? So the video is actually more helpful. It's always up to date. And they realized some ESG savings as well, but they were able to quantify that. So they were able to go back to the CEO and say, here's what we did in procurement, and we made a change here, So it's just one use case, So you need the visibility. You have to know what you're buying. It all starts there. You can't ignore the cost savings, right? Because we're still in the real world, and that requires cost savings, And but now you can incorporate ESG type of initiatives and using tools to measure these things, and then using your leverage. And we've been using leverage to buy things forever, right? That's why procurement exists, So, but now use it for slightly different changes, And then you'll be actually creating value in the company, And that value is the valuation of the company. And now that alignment issue that I spoke about at the beginning, that goes away. When you go back to the CEO and say, here's what we did, and here's the measurement around that, it makes a big difference. Okay, so my colleagues here have a handout. If you scan the QR code, there's a brief survey to fill out, and in that survey, and if you do that, we'll happily send you a gift of Amazon card. We do require a work email, so please do that. And so that survey will be up through the rest of the conference. And if you don't get the card now, you can come to our booth and we give it to you there. Also on that landing page is all the references I made, so you can download all those things, as well as the presentation. And with that, I'd like to open it up with any questions. Okay, well then I guess it's lunchtime.
It's not quite lunchtime, actually. We do have one more session after this. So thanks to both of you for the great